Welcome to my review of Spock Must Die, or should that be Seagull's Log, Spock Must Die, Stardate. I don't know what the date is, it's about 5 in the morning. So this is my first ever Star Trek tie-in. It was also the first ever Star Trek book released that wasn't based on or adapted from existing episodes or a movie. The author James Blish was a prolific science fiction writer, not just in Star Trek but also in his own long-running series. So TV/movie tie-ins usually go one of two ways. They try to mimic existing standards, or, given the increased license and freed from budget constraints, they go nuts and they're full of space battles and zanier and zalier aliens. They might also share the main focus with some of the fringe characters. Now Blish takes the former route, a little conservatively following the talky morality of the original series, which will please some, especially those disappointed by J.J. Abrams' Star Trek. Of Blish's 8 Hugo and Nebula Awards, only 2 were for full-length novels, and this at almost 120 pages is much more like a novella as well. Just a word of warning before we go any further, my knowledge of Trek lore is by no means of a high standard, so feel free to post corrections in the comments below. Please try and be a little bit respectful. I am doing my best here. So the plot is simple and very standard Star Trek fare. A transporter incident creates a copy of Spock, and with both claiming the status as the original and each demanding the death of the other, Kirk must establish who is who. The duplication of Spock, it removes the sensationalism from the bombastic "Spock must die" exclamation point of the title. Some sort of morality question such as, would the death of Spock be unjustified or even save others? It might have been a little bit more interesting. But they'd never do that, would they? Meanwhile, the Klingons have taken advantage of the disappearance of the Organians to launch a series of devastating raids against the Federation, breaking the treaty imposed and policed by the Organians from the beginning in the episode Errand of Mercy. When hostilities break out, the Enterprise is exploring on the opposite side of the Klingon Empire, putting them effectively behind enemy lines, but also nearer to Organia than any other ship, so they race there to see why they haven't intervened. Despite its short length, Blish's novel feels as pedestrian as if it was hamstrung by a lower-than-ambitions TV budget. The huge battles between Starfleet and the Klingon Empire are related by communique. The Enterprise, as in Errand of Mercy in fact, is involved in only one engagement that could be called a space battle. As said, this will please many in that it's much more like the original series, and it's completely dissimilar to J.J. Abrams' Trek. Each chapter begins with a captain's log, but none of them feels much like Kirk. Here's an example from page 35. I have interdicted further orders from either Spock until the identity question can be resolved, if it can be, although it effectively deprives me of a first officer. This is a long way from being even a satisfactory interim move, however, since even without authority, an alienated Spock could work all kinds of mischief. But there is no way of preventing them short of throwing them both in the brig, a step for which I have no present grounds. Now, firstly, Kirk does have grounds. The Enterprise has been endangered previously by somebody deliberately disobeying his orders. Secondly, there isn't any way to claim this sounds like something Kirk would say. The dialogue throughout is overwordy, such as this example from page 55, which is also from Kirk. We have been acting first and thinking afterward entirely too much, and I do not accept myself, nor am I blaming anyone since we've been under continuous pressure both of emotion and of event, but it's time for a casting up of accounts. On page 64, Scotty uses the phrase bollocksing, as in bollocksing up. This seems unusual and out of place enough to be jarring. Perhaps somebody can clarify, has Scotty ever used this phrase before on Star Trek? Further to this, after discussing what may or may not happen to the soul in a matter transporter, Kirk and the others discover that they can transport a person across the galaxy by converting their normal proton, electron, positron and neutron particles to faster-than-light tachyons. Now the technobabble is limited, given the wordiness of the preceding philosophical discussion, but Scotty's description of the process seems to confirm that the new method, anyway, does create a duplicate, albeit one made of tachyons. But he then demonstrates a distinct lack of concern for the duplicate's welfare. Tachyons are, according to Blish, and I'm no scientist, of no value. he implies being made of tachyons makes you a null entity. Yet Scotty also explicitly says that the duplicate will function cognitively and physically at the destination, and on return will be held in a tachyon state until he yields up the material, and then they will let him go poof and disintegrate into so much tachyon plasma in another universe. He also explicitly states that the original won't leave the ship. Now, my very much a layman's understanding of this leaves a bad taste in my mouth. It feels morally abhorrent to create a duplicate and then especially to destroy it once you're done with it. Despite what Scotty says of the science involved, the process does in the end create what appears to be an exact duplicate of Spock. So the talk of tachyons having no value, etc., is proven irrelevant. This really bothers me. I never considered Scotty to be blasé or amoral, quite the opposite in fact. Kirk also decides to keep both Spocks on active duty. It's fair to say then that he obviously doesn't watch a lot of science fiction, because most of us can guess almost immediately that one Spock will be good and the other bad. It seems more sensible to confine both to Quarters or the brig, despite then lacking Spock's expertise in the situation with the Klingons. But when sabotage is expected, Kirk is still extremely reluctant to act. It just doesn't seem much like Kirk. Also, this is a minor thing, but perhaps a good Trekkie can clear it up. At what point could a ship's captain ask the computer to locate a crew member? I remember this a lot on The Next Generation, but I'm not so sure about the original series. It seems to me that simply asking the computer to locate Spock would have resolved the identity issue. Given the physical difference that later come to light, it seems almost certain that they would. But later in the book, when Spock is on the run, they don't ask the computer to find him. Yet when they're on an away mission, Uhura can pinpoint the location of all the team members from the ship and through an unidentified alien shield. Bones' discovery of how to tell the two Spocks apart comes a little bit out of nowhere, and even in Blish's own narrative is described as a fantastic anticlimax. Kirk and co. give the saboteur a 10-second countdown to surrender himself, and are then shocked to discover he's used the 10-second countdown to give his escape attempt a 10-second head start. It seems quite stupid that even minimal security was eschewed, despite the repeated insistence of the danger posed to the ship. The weakness of this part of the book, the ease of the escape, left me hoping that Blish would pull a double bluff, that there would be a further twist in the Who's Who mystery, but alas not. The description of Kirk's manic industrial hallucinations caused by the alien shield is really impressive. It's detailed, it's evocative, and it proves Blish's ability as a writer. However, it stands out as anomalous as the rest of his text is sparse, and this passage is almost realist. In the same section, Kirk's handling of and escape from the hallucinative effects of the shield is also fairly thoughtful and handled quite well. It is perhaps this part of the book that feels most like the style of the original series. The finale, however, Spock vs. Spock, with an alien landscape as both weapons and setting, was probably beyond those early shows in terms of spectacle effects and budget. And in that it's a microcosm for the book as a whole. It's fairly faithful to the tone of early Trek, yet it's bogged down by excessively wordy dialogue, but despite that it's still quite nice to have a new-ish anyway adventure for the old crew, even if Blish then doesn't quite get the characters right, and it leaves you feeling a touch like it isn't just Spock who's an imposter. In conclusion, Spock Must Die is very average at its best and a bit below at its worst. Blish can write, as Kirk's hallucinations prove. For the most part, he just doesn't choose to. You would hope a novel this short would be packed with incident, but it feels like the overwordy exchanges are instead just filler. As such, my first foray into Trek tie-ins is a disappointing one, and only a certain group of Trekkies will get much out of this book. Casuals will likely find it boring, diehards will lament its divergence from the canon, its misfiring characterization, and its failure to fully utilize the strengths of the textual medium in terms of scale, or even expanding the roles of characters such as Sulu and Uhura, things that the running time of the TV show necessarily restricted. Perhaps while you're living long and prospering, you can click like, subscribe, and perhaps check out some of the other reviews on my channel.